At 2:15 in the morning, sour milk trickled down my sleeve and soaked into the cuff of my faded sweatshirt. 3 glass bottles clicked softly against the side of a stainless steel saucepan. In the quiet living room, my husband Daniel was fast asleep on the couch, his chest rising and falling with our tiny daughter, Nora, resting on his heart. June had finally stopped crying, but Lucy, the smallest of our premature triplets, glared at the ceiling fan with pure outrage. My feet burned inside my compression socks. My lower back throbbed from hours of rocking, bouncing, and swaying. Then my eyes fell back onto the thick cream envelope sitting on the cluttered kitchen counter. Underneath our printed Westerville address, Evan had written 7 words in dark blue ink. I hope you finally learn to be happy for other people. The sheer audacity of those words cut through my exhaustion like a straight razor. Before I could even process the burn, my mind involuntarily drifted 2 years back into the cold concrete garage where this nightmare first began. 2 years ago, Evan Mercer ended our 4-year relationship in the underground parking structure beneath Riverside Methodist Hospital. I was 39 years old. He was 40. We had been engaged for 9 months, reserved a banquet hall at a hotel in Dublin, Ohio, and spent our Sunday afternoons driving through quiet neighborhoods looking at houses with manicured lawns. Evan talked about having children constantly. He wanted 2, a boy first, if possible. His mother, Evelyn, spoke about the Mercer family line as if they belonged to European nobility rather than a suburban family operating a commercial office furniture business outside Columbus. When my periods became irregular, I blamed the relentless stress at work. As the chief accountant for a regional supermarket chain, I was managing a massive software migration and sleeping barely 5 hours a night. But after a year of trying to conceive without success, we scheduled an appointment at a reproductive endocrinology clinic. The specialist was a calm woman with silver-framed glasses who spoke in low, measured tones. She pulled up my lab results on her monitor and carefully explained that my ovarian reserve was lower than expected for my age. She added that my left fallopian tube showed a partial blockage. Your chances of natural conception are reduced, she said gently, but reduced does not mean 0. IVF remains a viable option for you. I held on to that word, reduced. Evan, sitting right beside me, heard something entirely different. So she's infertile? He asked instantly. The doctor turned toward him. Infertility is a broad clinical diagnosis, Mr. Mercer. It does not mean pregnancy is impossible. Evan leaned back in his leather chair. The shift was subtle, but I felt the temperature in the room plunge. He stared at the floor tiles as we rode the elevator down to the garage. He didn't touch my hand. He didn't offer a single word of comfort. By the time we reached my car, he was already talking like a man trying to cut his losses on a failing business venture. I'm 40 years old, Sarah, he said, staring at the concrete wall behind my car instead of looking at my face. I can't spend years chasing something that might never happen. I don't want my entire life to become doctor appointments, hormone injections, and constant disappointment. My hands trembled against my purse straps. We just got the first set of lab results, Mark. The doctor said we have options. You said you wanted a family with me. I do want a family, he replied flatly. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. I forced myself to ask the question that was tearing through my chest. With me? Mark looked away. He reached into his pocket, unclipped the brass key to my condo from his keyring, and dropped it into the cup holder between our seats. There was no raised voice, no tearful embrace, no promise to call after we both calmed down. Just the soft metallic click of a key sitting next to a crumpled parking receipt. What about your test results? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The doctor said your lab work wasn't fully processed yet. My numbers are fine, he said quickly, far too quickly. Everything on my end is normal. He stepped out of the car, closed the door with a firm, final thud, and walked toward his sedan without looking back. I drove back to my apartment in Worthington with both hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I missed my highway exit entirely and drove 15 miles in the wrong direction before I even realized where I was. That same evening, Evelyn Mercer arrived at my front door. She carried 2 heavy canvas grocery bags filled with Mark's remaining belongings, his running shoes, his phone charger, his shaving kit, and the charcoal sweater I had bought him for his birthday. She remained standing on the welcome mat outside, refusing to step inside. "I'm sorry it ended this way, Sarah," she said smoothly. Her tone carried the polite, hollow sympathy she usually reserved for restaurant servers who brought her the wrong side salad. Mark has always wanted a family. At his age, he simply cannot afford to waste years hoping a doctor changes her mind. "The doctor didn't say it was impossible," I said, my voice shaking with rising fury. "You weren't even in the room, Evelyn." Evelyn adjusted the strap of her handbag and gave me a tight, practiced smile. "You're a capable woman, Sarah, but a marriage must offer a man the future he planned for. A woman who cannot give a man a family doesn't have much purpose in his future." Before I could speak, she looked past me into the foyer. "Please return the antique cake server my mother gave you for the engagement party before I leave." I shut the heavy wooden door right in her face without uttering another word. When her footsteps faded down the hallway, the silence in my apartment felt deafening. The loud, steady ticking of the kitchen clock echoed off the bare walls. I sank onto the hardwood floor, right next to those 2 grocery bags, and pulled my knees to my chest. I felt broken, defective, and utterly discarded. A line item erased from someone else's ledger because I no longer balanced the equation. Back in my small Westerville kitchen at 2:20 in the morning, the sour smell of spilled formula brought me sharply back to the present. I looked down at the cream invitation in my hand, then out at Daniel sleeping peacefully on the couch, holding our daughter close. A cold, steady clarity settled deep in my chest. The woman who wept on that hallway floor 2 years ago was gone. I set the baby bottle down, smoothed out my sweatshirt, and took a deep, quiet breath. 6 weeks after Mark walked out, the fertility clinic called while I sat at my desk eating a lukewarm salad. The nurse spoke in neutral tones, asking if Mark had completed his follow-up consultation. Privacy laws prevented her from sharing his results, but her sudden pause on the line stopped my fork midair. She gently suggested I request a full copy of my own medical chart. The next morning, I downloaded 73 pages from the secure patient portal. White paper, crisp black ink, cold clinical terminology. As a chief accountant, I spent my days auditing complex financial ledgers, searching for hidden discrepancies in numbers. Now, I am auditing my own body. I read every line twice. The report confirmed my diminished ovarian reserve and the partial blockage in my left fallopian tube. But nowhere did it say I was sterile. It recommended IVF as a viable path. Then my eyes locked onto a single line buried under the doctor's notes, pending semen analysis results for male partner. My breath hitched. The quiet office seemed to shrink. I remembered Mark's pale face in the parking garage, his rapid insistence that his numbers were perfectly normal. He had never completed his testing. He had received an initial flag on his sample, panicked, and run away. To protect his own fragile pride, he allowed his mother and friends to believe my body was broken. He let me carry the crushing weight of his silent shame. I did not call him. I did not demand an apology. Instead, I scheduled a second opinion at a fertility center in Cincinnati. Dr. Anita Shaw was a sharp woman with silver hair and warm eyes. She reviewed my charts and laid out the stark realities of IVF at 39. She spoke of high costs, painful hormone injections, low success rates, and emotional toll. "Natural conception is difficult for you, Sarah," she said, folding her hands on her oak desk. "But it is not impossible. Anyone who told you motherhood was completely out of reach lied to you." I sat in my car in the sun-drenched parking lot and cried until my ribs ached. I was crying because someone had finally spoken the truth without using it as a weapon to destroy my dignity. I wanted to start hormone treatments immediately to prove Mark wrong. But during a mandatory psychological evaluation, the therapist asked a quiet question. "If your ex-fiancé never finds out whether this treatment works, would you still want to do it?" The silence in that room was deafening. An ugly truth surfaced. Part of me wanted a child, but another part wanted revenge. I paused all medical treatments for 3 months. I committed myself to weekly therapy sessions. I started running along the Scioto River at dawn, feeling the cold morning air fill my lungs. I took control of my personal finances, cutting unnecessary expenses, and building a savings account for my future. I bought fresh clothes that fit comfortably instead of hiding behind oversized sweaters. I shifted my entire mindset. I was no longer a victim mourning a canceled wedding. I was a self-reliant woman taking total responsibility for my own happiness. That was when I met David Vance. We bumped into each other at a hardware store in downtown Westerville on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Both of us reached for the last box of heavy-duty wall anchors. He wore worn work boots, canvas pants, and had 2 ballpoint pens tucked into his flannel shirt pocket. "You take them," he said, offering an easy smile that crinkled his hazel eyes. "You look like a woman on a mission." "I am repairing a floating shelf that fell off my wall," I replied, laughing despite myself. "I teach woodworking and plumbing at the Adult Vocational Center," he said, holding out a calloused hand. "David Vance." Nothing cinematic happened under those humming fluorescent lights. But 2 weeks later, we met again at a local grief support group. David was there because his wife had died of cancer 3 years prior, leaving him to raise his son alone. I was there because my therapist suggested I learn how to process loss before trying to build a new life. After the meeting, we walked outside into the crisp autumn night. Cold air rushed into our lungs, smelling of damp leaves and wood smoke. I still talk to my wife when I'm driving on I-270, David admitted softly, leaning against his pickup truck. I tell her about traffic jams, as if she can fix them. I still hold fake arguments with Mark in the shower, I confessed, looking down at my shoes. David gave a low, warm laugh. He sounds much less convincing when you control both sides of the conversation. Our relationship grew slowly, built on mutual respect and absolute honesty. David fixed my creaking stairs. I helped him organize his small business accounts. He never rushed me. The first real test of our bond came 6 months later, inside his parked truck outside a diner. Coffee steam fogged the glass. I told him I was ready to restart my IVF journey. David stared through the windshield before turning to face me. "Can I ask you something without you getting defensive, Sarah?" "That usually means I am about to get defensive," I said, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. "Do you want a child with me because you want a family?" he asked gently. "Or are you still trying to prove something to the man who left you?" The question felt like a slap, but his words grounded me. He was right. I looked at his honest face and realized I did not need Mark's validation anymore. "I want a child," I whispered, tears spilling over my eyelashes. "Not a witness, just a child to love with you." We moved forward together with clear minds. We managed our finances, attended counseling, and married 10 months later at the Franklin County Courthouse. My mother wore a bright yellow dress and complained about the courthouse coffee, though she drank 2 full cups. Our second IVF cycle produced 2 healthy embryos. When the ultrasound machine later displayed 3 distinct, fluttering heartbeats, David let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. The pregnancy was grueling. At 32 weeks, severe preeclampsia forced an emergency C-section. Nora, June, and Lucy arrived weighing barely 3 pounds each, going straight into the intensive care unit. For 6 long weeks, our life was measured in heart rate monitors, feeding tubes, and early morning drives through freezing fog. When we finally brought all 3 baby girls home to Westerville, I believed the ghosts of my past were permanently buried. Then, on a quiet Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The text message came from an unknown number. "My name is Jessica Hayes. I am marrying Mark Miller in 2 weeks." I found an old medical bill on his desk. "He lies every time I ask him about you. Did he lie about your fertility too?" I stood motionless beside the cribs, holding my breath as the past knocked loudly on my door once again. 3 days later, I drove to a Panera Bread in Worthington to meet Jessica Hayes. The air inside smelled of fresh yeast, roasted coffee, and sweet cinnamon. Jessica sat in a booth near the back window. She was a 32-year-old dental hygienist with pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, and an exhausted demeanor. In front of her sat a cold paper mug. Her thumb repeatedly rubbed the edge of a thick manila envelope. I slid into the wooden booth across from her. She looked up, her hand trembling slightly. "Thank you for coming, Sarah," she said quietly. "I almost didn't," I replied, keeping my hands flat on the table. Jessica took a slow, deep breath. "Mark told me you were obsessed with him. He said you were trying to ruin his life." "I haven't thought about Mark in 2 years," I said calmly. "That must be disappointing for his ego." She reached into her handbag and slid a folded paper across the table. It was a billing statement from the fertility clinic. Mark's name was printed in bold black letters at the top. "I found this while packing boxes for our new house," Jessica whispered. When I asked him, his story changed 3 times. First, he said it was a routine physical. Then, he said the lab mixed up his paperwork. Then he accused me of prying. I looked at the date. It matched the month Mark ended our engagement. "That sounds very familiar," I said. Jessica leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Did he blame your body for ending your engagement?" "Yes," I answered without hesitation. Jessica closed her eyes. Her shoulders sagged. "My doctor suggested we both complete fertility testing before our wedding. Mark refused. He told me I was 32 and that my biological clock was ticking faster. So we should start with me." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. She was living in my past. "I have had blood drawn 4 times in 6 months," Jessica continued, her voice cracking slightly. "Hormone panels, invasive ultrasounds, painful dye procedures. I went to every appointment alone because he was always too busy at the car dealership." I unlocked my phone and opened a saved digital folder. I showed her my official medical summary signed by Dr. Anita Shaw in Cincinnati. Jessica read the screen, silently. Diminished ovarian reserve. Partial tube blockage. Recommended IVF. Natural conceptional difficulty, but not impossible. "You weren't sterile," Jessica said, looking up with wide eyes. "No," I replied. And Mark knew that. He was sitting right next to me when the doctor explained my options. Then I opened an archived text thread from 2 years ago and handed the phone across the table. Jessica read the words Mark had sent me. "Mom thinks it's better if people believe you hid your condition. No woman wants to marry a man with fertility issues. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Jessica stared at the glass screen. The espresso machine behind the counter hissed loudly, spraying a cloud of bitter steam. "I was hoping these weren't real," she whispered, handing the phone back. When I confronted his mother, Mrs. Evelyn told me you were emotionally unstable. Evelyn is very protective of her son's social standing. I said softly. What should I do? Jessica asked, her eyes searching my face. You don't need to believe me, Jessica, I said. You just need to decide whether you can trust the man you are about to marry. We both stood up to leave. The heavy glass door rattled as the chill autumn wind swept through the entrance. Sarah, Jessica called out, turning around. Her face was pale, but her chin was set firm. I haven't canceled the wedding yet. I am going to ask him one more time in private tonight. If he tells me the truth, nobody else ever has to know. That is reasonable, I nodded. If he lies again, Jessica said, her voice shaking, will you come to the hotel on Saturday? He will tell everyone I am losing my mind. I need someone there who knows the truth. I drove home to Westerville with her words echoing in my mind. That evening, as I stood in my kitchen folding warm baby blankets, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Mrs. Evelyn Miller. Dear Sarah, I trust you received our invitation. I certainly hope there are no hard feelings. You might feel more comfortable wearing a dark dress. Darker colors are far more forgiving on older women after childbirth. The photographer will be taking candid shots of the guests. We want everyone to look their best. The insult was wrapped in silk, dripping with polite venom. Evelyn did not want a guest. She wanted an audience to witness her son's triumph over my alleged failure. David walked into the kitchen, carrying a basket of clean towels. He looked at my face, then at the glowing screen. Bait, he asked quietly. Pure venom, I replied. She wants me to sit in the back row and look miserable while Mark plays the happy groom. Are you going? David asked, setting the basket down. I wasn't going to, I said, feeling a surge of quiet, unbreakable strength rise within me. I don't care about Mark, but I won't let them destroy another woman's life while I stay silent. David nodded slowly, a warm, supportive smile touching his eyes. Then I'll drive you. I locked my phone and set it face down on the granite counter. The fear that had ruled my life 2 years ago was completely gone. I was ready to face the past. On Saturday afternoon, the grand lobby of the Dublin Hotel smelled of crushed white roses, expensive perfume, and warm floor wax. Sunbeams poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, illuminating marble tiles polished to a mirror finish. Guests dressed in tailored suits and silk evening gowns chatted near the fountain, their laughter ringing against the high ceiling. I arrived alone to protect my daughters from the crowded room and lingering bacteria. David stayed outside in the open courtyard with my mother, pushing our double stroller beneath the shaded birch trees. I wore a simple navy wrap dress, fitted comfortably against my body, paired with modest dark heels. My hair was pulled back into a neat, elegant knot. I was 39 years old, a mother of 3, and completely free from the need to impress anyone in that room. I walked past the guest book stand and moved quietly down the carpeted hallway toward the bridal suite. 2 groomsmen stood near the door, clutching crystal champagne flutes, but they stepped aside when they saw the quiet intensity in my stride. I turned the brass door handle and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of hairspray, lavender lotion, and cold sweat. Jessica stood near the center of the room in her ivory lace wedding gown. Her veil was already pinned to her hair, but her cheeks were flushed and her hands trembled against her silk bouquet. Her father, Robert Hayes, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a charcoal suit with silver hair, stood beside her, his arms crossed over his chest. In the corner, holding an official leather folder, stood the elderly wedding officiant. Mark and his mother, Evelyn, stood near the vanity table. Mark looked sharp in his black tuxedo, but his face paled the moment his eyes locked onto mine. What is she doing here? Mark demanded, his voice cracking slightly before he forced it into a loud, commanding tone. He stepped toward Jessica. I told you she was unhinged. She is obsessed with me. She is trying to ruin our wedding day. I did not raise my voice. I did not step closer. I stood firmly by the closed door, holding my leather handbag in front of me. I was invited, I said, my voice even calm and resonant, and I am here because Jessica asked me to be her witness. Evelyn stepped forward, her diamond necklace sparkling under the vanity lights. Her lips were pressed into a thin, bitter line. This is outrageous, Sarah. You have no right to barge in here with your bitterness. Mark moved on with a younger woman who can actually give him a future. Leave before I have hotel security escort you out. Let her speak, Robert Hayes commanded. His deep, gravelly voice echoed off the mirror walls. He looked directly at Mark. You told me 20 minutes ago that you never took a fertility test in your entire life. You swore to me in your honor that Sarah made up those text messages using a fake phone app. Mark swallowed hard. A drop of sweat glistened near his hairline. I swear, because it's the truth, Robert. Sarah edited those screenshots. She has been bitter ever since I walked away from her. Jessica looked at me. She did not cry. She did not scream. Her eyes were steady, filled with a cold, tragic clarity. Show them, Sarah. I opened my handbag, pulled out a manila folder, and laid a single document on the glass coffee table in the center of the room. It was not a phone screenshot. It was an official, certified record from the wireless telecommunications provider, stamped with an official notary seal showing the complete, unedited text message history between my phone number and Mark's number from 2 years ago. Robert stepped forward, picked up the paper, and read the printed lines aloud. Mom thinks it's better if people believe you hid your condition. No woman wants to marry a man with fertility issues. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The air in the room turned ice cold. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Mark stared at the paper in his father-in-law's hands. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His confident posture collapsed, his shoulders slumping forward as he looked desperately at his mother. That is taken out of context. Evelyn snapped, her composure shattering completely. Her face turned bright red as she stepped toward Robert, waving her manicured hand dismissively. So what if his sample showed a low count? It was just one bad test. The doctor said it was inconclusive because Mark was under tremendous stress at the dealership. There was no need to burden Jessica with unnecessary panic before the wedding. The words hung in the air like a heavy anvil. Jessica gasped softly, taking a step back. She looked at Evelyn, then at Mark. You knew, she whispered. You knew your test was abnormal 2 years ago, and you sat there for 6 months watching me get stabbed with needles, watching me cry over negative pregnancy tests, letting me believe my body was broken. Jessica, listen to me, Mark stammered, reaching out to touch her arm. It didn't matter. We could have used donors or treatments after we got married. I just wanted us to get through the wedding first. It didn't matter. Robert Hayes roared, his face darkening with anger. He stepped between Mark and his daughter. You let my daughter undergo invasive medical procedures while you hid your own medical records. You lied to her face every single day for a year. My son is not broken. Evelyn shouted, her voice shrill and desperate. A man's pride matters. Jessica is almost 33. She needed to start her medical evaluations anyway. I stepped forward, my voice cutting cleanly through the noise. Mark's diagnosis was never a crime. Evelyn, I said, looking straight at Mark. Mine wasn't either. The shame was letting everyone believe my body was defective because you were too cowardly to face your own reality. You didn't leave me because I was infertile. You left me because telling the truth frightened you more than destroying my dignity. Mark stared at me, completely stripped of his arrogance. For the first time in 2 years, he had no excuses left. Jessica reached up to her hair. With slow, deliberate movements, she unpinned her lace veil. She did not throw it in anger. She folded it neatly, smoothing out the tulle, and placed it gently on the armchair beside her. Then, she pulled off her diamond engagement ring and dropped it into Mark's open palm. "I could have walked through any medical struggle with you, Mark," Jessica said, her voice shaking with quiet, absolute finality. "I could have loved you through any diagnosis. But I cannot marry a man who lets women carry his shame for him. The wedding is over. Jessica, please." Mark begged, his voice high and frantic. "Think about the guests. Think about the deposits. We paid $50,000 for this hall." "My father will handle the vendors," Jessica replied coldly. She turned to her father. "Dad, please tell the guests the ceremony is canceled." Robert Hayes nodded sternly. He grabbed Mark by the lapel of his tuxedo, pushing him back toward the corner. "You and your mother have 5 minutes to collect your things and leave this hotel before I have security throw you into the street." Mark turned to leave, but in his panic, he stumbled over a decorative floor vase. Evelyn rushed forward to help him, but her heel caught on the edge of the oriental rug. She wobbled dangerously, her hands flailing in the air. Without thinking, I stepped forward and caught Evelyn firmly by her elbow, stabilizing her before she could crash onto the hard marble floor. Evelyn froze. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock, humiliation, and disbelief. She was breathing heavily, her face pale. I looked down at her, holding her arm until she regained her balance, then slowly withdrew my hand. "I won't let you fall," I said softly, my voice completely devoid of hatred. "But I will never let you or your son hurt me again." She stared at me, speechless, her lips trembling as Mark dragged her out the side door toward the parking lot. I walked out of the bridal suite and moved through the carpeted hallway into the main lobby. The news had already reached the guests. Whisperings spread across the room, like wind through tall grass. Groomsmen were rushing back and forth, caterers looked confused, and guests stood near the bar holding silent champagne glasses. I stepped through the heavy glass doors into the bright afternoon sunlight. The fresh air smelled of green grass and warm summer pavement. David was waiting near the courtyard fountain. He saw me walking toward him, his hazel eyes scanning my face with quiet concern. He didn't ask what happened. He simply held out a cold bottle of water and reached for my hand. Near the stroller, my daughter Lucy was sitting up, chewing happily on a soft cloth book. Beside her, Nora and June were sleeping peacefully beneath the shade canopy. As we walked toward our SUV in the hotel parking lot, Mark came running out of the side entrance, clutching his tuxedo jacket. He saw us loading the stroller into the back of our car. He stopped 15 feet away, his face pale, his eyes red. He looked at David, then at me, and finally at the 3 tiny car seats lined up in the back row. "How?" Mark rasped, his voice hollow and broken. "How did you do this?" I adjusted the strap of my navy dress and looked at him. I felt no urge to boast. I felt no urge to rub my happiness in his face. I simply saw a small, frightened man standing alone in a parking lot. "Because my body was never broken, Mark," I said gently, "your lies were." He stood there motionless as David closed the trunk door with a solid, satisfying thud. We climbed into the car, clicked our seatbelts, and pulled out of the parking lot onto the main road. That night, after the girls were fed, bathed, and tucked into their cribs, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was one final text from Mark's number. "You destroyed my entire future just to prove you could have a family." I looked at the glowing screen in the quiet dark of my bedroom. I didn't type 3 paragraphs of anger. I didn't call my mother to complain. I typed 11 words. I didn't destroy your future. I stopped helping you hide from it. I tapped his profile, pressed block number, and laid the phone face down on the wood table. I turned around, climbed into bed beside David, and closed my eyes, listening to the steady, rhythmic breathing of my family in the next room. The long nightmare was finally over. In the weeks following the canceled wedding, life returned to its steady, quiet rhythm. There were no grand movie endings or sudden miracles. Healing in the real world was slow, built on small daily routines. Jessica Hayes officially ended her engagement to Mark. Her father helped her recover her portion of the venue deposits through firm legal notices. She moved into a small, sunlit apartment closer to the dental clinic where she worked. One quiet afternoon, she sent me a short text. "Thank you for answering a stranger." I replied with 5 words. "Take good care of yourself." We never became close friends or met for coffee again. We didn't need to. Sometimes 2 women simply help each other survive the same storm before walking in different directions, tied only by a quiet, shared respect. In our home in Westerville, middle age remained delightfully ordinary. My wrists ached every evening from lifting 3 growing infants. David's strained shoulder healed slowly with physical therapy, but he never complained. Hospital bills still arrived in white envelopes, requiring careful budgeting. Sleep came in brief, 3-hour stretches. David and I still had small, tired arguments over who forgot to restock the formula cans, or whose turn it was to wash the endless stack of baby bottles. But we navigated those moments together, anchored by mutual trust and patience. My mother had her hip replacement surgery late that autumn. For 6 weeks, she stayed in our guest room during her recovery. She proudly decorated her aluminum walker with bright red ribbons, so the girls wouldn't try to chew on the tennis balls attached to the back legs. One warm afternoon, I walked into the living room and found my mother slowly racing her walker across the rug, while June squealed with laughter from her playmat. "I am winning," my mother announced, gripping the handles firmly. "Against whom?" I asked, smiling as I set down a tray of tea. "Against arthritis," she replied with a sharp wink. On the girls' first birthday, our backyard filled with folding chairs, paper lanterns, and family. The late afternoon air smelled of grilled burgers, cut grass, and sweet charcoal smoke. Golden sunlight filtered through the oak trees, casting a warm, honey-colored glow across the grass, the true golden hour. David stood near the grill, wearing his canvas apron, turning burgers while laughing with my brother. My mother sat in a lawn chair, holding a paper plate and supervising everyone with affectionate authority. In the middle of the lawn, Nora, June, and Lucy sat on a large blanket, systematically smashing their tiny smash cakes into pastel pink crumbs. June laughed hysterically at a potato sitting on the grass, while Lucy hurled a plastic spoon across the yard with impressive force. I stepped inside the cool house to search for a pair of scissors in the kitchen junk drawer. As I moved aside rolls of tape and spare keys, my hand brushed against a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was Mark's wedding invitation. I had forgotten it was there. I pulled it out and unfolded the paper. At the bottom, his handwritten words remained. "I hope you finally learned to be happy for other people." 2 years ago, those words felt like a dagger designed to make me bleed. Now, standing in my bright kitchen, I looked at them and smiled. The ink had faded. The threat was gone. I realized then that my happiness had never come from watching Mark's life fall apart. Revenge had not healed my heart. The truth had. Mark's medical diagnosis never made him a bad man, just as my diminished reserve had never made me a lesser woman. What broke us was his fear, his pride, and his willingness to sacrifice my dignity to protect his own image. I carried the cream envelope out to the garage, and dropped it into the blue recycling bin, letting the lid snap shut with a clear, definitive click. David walked out through the screen door, wiping his hands on a towel. He saw me standing by the bin and looked at my face with a warm, knowing smile. "Throwing out old paper?" he asked softly. "Throwing out old weight," I replied, stepping toward him. "You sure?" he asked, wrapping an arm gently around my waist. "I don't need reminders anymore," I said, leaning my head against his shoulder. "I am living my answer." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep orange and soft violet, I stood at the edge of the patio. The warm breeze carried the sound of my daughter's bright, bubbling laughter and the steady, comforting hum of the man I loved beside me. Healing does not begin when the world finally believes your story. It begins when you stop believing the lies that were told about you. I took a deep, clear breath, looked out at the golden light covering my family, and felt completely, unshakably free. All shadows must fade before the truth, and every pain is simply the start of a beautiful rebirth. Always remember, the right to write a new chapter of your life is forever in your hands. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below so we know we're walking this journey together. Hope to see you on the next page.